I never imagined that a single decision, made in the middle of a perfectly ordinary morning, would change how I saw my entire life. I suppose that's the way these things happen. You live so long in the story you're given that you stop questioning the lines. You just follow the script quietly, always trying to keep things together, always hoping this will be the time it all just works out, that you finally get a version of family that doesn't leave you looking over your shoulder. That morning, we were heading to a family reunion. The plan was boring by design. Pack up the car before sunrise, snacks loaded in the back, coffee up front, a few hours on the road, then the crossing, then the relatives, the awkward conversations, the fake smiles, the pretending to like potato salad. I thought I was ready for the routine. I thought I had built up enough distance between myself and the old patterns to just get through it. I always drove. It was never up for debate. I have too many opinions about breaking distances and merging lanes, and somewhere along the line, I decided it was easier to just do it myself than pretend to relax while someone else was at the wheel. The kids were in the back, half awake, half arguing, half watching cartoons, 3 bodies tangled in matching travel pillows, lost in their own tiny universe. My husband sat beside me, quiet as always, focused on the road. It was just a drive, just another normal day, and I wanted it that way. That was my whole goal. Keep it simple, keep it calm, don't let anything spiral. But life doesn't ask what you want before it pulls the rug. We'd been on the highway for a while when everything shifted. I didn't see it coming. I never do, not really. One moment you're thinking about directions and playlists, and the next you're staring at your own hands, wondering how you're supposed to keep them from shaking. I followed the exit, not even sure why at first, just acting on instinct, on the silent signals that pass between people who have lived together long enough to read panic in a single breath. We left the highway behind, took a side road, then another. Silence filled the car, heavy and dense. I could feel the pressure building at the base of my neck, the familiar guilt of knowing I should be asking more questions, but being too afraid of the answers. I've always been the one to smooth things over. My entire life, that's been my role. The responsible one, the boring one. The one who never needed much, who never asked for more, who just did what was expected and called it love. I grew up in a house where the appearance of stability mattered more than the reality, where having 5 kinds of mustard in the fridge was proof that we were doing fine, even if the gas was off and the credit cards were maxed out. Where the unspoken rule was, you stick to the story or you get rewritten. There were good years, flush years, when we had new things, cars, TVs, the patio set that sat unused on the deck, purchased more for show than comfort. There were lean years too, the ones with cereal for dinner and sudden overtime shifts that no one talked about because pretending was easier than explaining. Even as a child, I understood that my job was to keep things from falling apart. I became the one they called for help, the one who bridged the gaps, the one who handed over what little I had just to avoid being cast as the selfish one. I did it without thinking, the way you learn to hold your breath before you even know you're underwater. My sister was different. She had that shine, that talent for making people feel special, even as she quietly took what she wanted. She was the favorite, and everyone knew it. I learned to live with that. I learned to accept the smaller piece, to be the one who offered help when I could, and boundaries when I had to, though that never seemed to be enough. So when the trouble started up again, I shouldn't have been surprised. It always starts the same way. A phone call, a story, a plea for help disguised as family news. This time it was about my nephew, my sister's son, struggling in school, not fitting in, needing a fresh start. They wanted to get him into a private school. They just needed a little help to lock in a deposit. They promised to pay it back. I said no. I tried to be gentle, to explain, to set a boundary. But it never lands the way I want. The air went cold. Suddenly, I was the one with rules, the one who didn't care, the one who was too serious. That silence stretched all the way up to the reunion. Then, like a switch flipping, everything was fine again. They were happy, they were cheerful, They said they'd worked it all out, found a way to make it happen. They wanted to see us. They wanted to know if we could take an extra bag in our car just this once, since theirs was so full and we had the space. I agreed without thinking. It didn't even register. I wanted to keep the peace. I wanted the trip to be simple. The morning we left, my dad handed me a red duffel bag, said it wouldn't fit in their trunk, asked if I could just throw it in with the rest of our stuff. I didn't ask what was inside. I didn't think twice. Looking back now, I can't believe how easy it was for me to play my part. I was so used to carrying their messes that I didn't see the danger right in front of me. The ride started out normal. The kids were restless, my husband quiet, the road familiar. But somewhere in those miles, something shifted. The air changed. He knew before I did. He saw it first, and I had no idea what was waiting for us just a few feet behind the seats, hidden under a pile of sweatshirts and old disappointments. I was just trying to keep us moving forward, still clinging to the idea that if I did everything right, nothing could go wrong. But there's always something you don't see until it's too late. The minutes after I pulled off the highway felt like a fog. My hands were on the wheel, but nothing else felt connected. There's a particular kind of silence that comes when you realize everything could fall apart, and you're the only one who doesn't know why. My mind kept looping through every possible reason for this sudden detour. I couldn't shake the guilt building in my chest, the feeling that I'd missed something crucial, the same way I always had growing up, never noticing the problem until it was already burning in my lap. We drove for what felt like forever. My husband silent beside me, the kids fidgeting and asking questions I barely registered. The road narrowed, trees pressing close, until he finally told me to pull off. I did as he asked, my body moving before my mind caught up. He got out and went to the back of the car, and all I could do was watch in the rearview mirror as he lifted the trunk. I waited, hands sweating, heart racing, the kind of dread that seeps in slow and heavy. Time slowed down, thick and syrupy, until he appeared by my window and told me to get out. I followed him to the back of the car, feeling as if I was moving through water. He opened the trunk and pointed. I stared, not wanting to look, but unable to stop myself. I saw the bag, the red duffel, the one I had so casually agreed to carry. He opened it, pulled back a layer of clothes, and I saw plastic packets shoved inside a child's toiletry bag. For a second, my brain tried to make sense of it. Medicine, maybe, or vitamins? Something harmless. But the shape was wrong. The way it was packed was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. My stomach dropped. The realization landed so hard I almost couldn't breathe. I stood there, paralyzed, counting every mistake I'd made, every time I let myself believe the best, every time I thought I could keep my distance by following their script. I hadn't just let myself down. I'd put everyone I loved at risk, my husband, my children. I'd allowed my parents to make us all a part of something I never wanted, something that could destroy everything. The heaviness in my chest made it hard to speak, but I managed to say what we both already knew. They put that in our car, with the kids in the back seat. He nodded, and there was nothing left to say. The silence was its own kind of confession, the final proof that no matter how much you try to separate yourself from your family's choices, they find a way to pull you back in. We didn't argue, we didn't yell, we just zipped the bag closed and let the reality settle in. The worst part was how ordinary it felt, standing there on a dirt road with the trunk open, and my entire life balanced on a decision I didn't even know I was making. My mind raced back through every interaction leading up to this moment, trying to see what I had missed. The casual way my dad handed over the bag, the sudden ease in my parents' voices when we left, the fact that they'd stopped pushing me about the money. They had been planning this. It wasn't an accident. They'd counted on me to do what I always did, carry their burdens without asking questions. That realization burned. For years, I'd convinced myself that my role as the responsible one protected me, made me different from them. I thought if I followed the rules, if I did everything right, I could stay clean. but all it did was make me a better shield for their mess. I was never the driver. I was just the getaway car, moving their problems out of sight so no one had to look too closely. We drove in silence. The kids in the back didn't notice, lost in their own world, and I envied them for it. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head, seeing the bag, feeling the floor drop out from under me. The guilt was sharp and alive, crawling up my spine. My phone started buzzing with calls I didn't answer. I didn't want to hear their voices, didn't want to listen to excuses or half-truths, or the same old pleas for understanding. I wanted distance. I wanted to be anywhere but here, in this version of my family where trust was nothing more than a trick of the light. Eventually, we ended up back at my parents' house. There was no plan. It just happened. My husband and I didn't need to speak. We both knew what had to be done. We carried the bag inside, left it in the hallway, and walked out. No explanation, no confrontation. Just a quiet surrender to the fact that we couldn't fix what had broken. I felt empty, like I'd shed a layer of skin and left it behind on their carpet. That night, after the kids were asleep and the world was quiet, I finally answered the phone. My mother's voice was bright and false, her concern sounding like something she'd rehearsed. She wanted to know what happened, where we were, where the bag was. I told her we left it at their house. There was a pause, long enough for both of us to understand what wasn't being said. I told her not to call again. I hung up, my hands shaking, and that should have been the end of it. But it never is. There's always another act in families like mine. Always one more way to remind you that you're not as free as you think. I spent that night wide awake, replaying every moment, every decision, trying to find the place where I could have changed the outcome. But all I saw was the same old pattern, repeating itself, and me standing in the middle, still hoping for something different. It's strange how quickly fear can turn into anger, and how easily both become exhaustion. After that night, I thought there would be peace. Instead, there was a new kind of pressure, the quiet but relentless weight of waiting for the next move. I didn't sleep much. Every sound in the house felt amplified. Every shadow seemed like a warning. The phone kept ringing. I left it on silent, watching the screen light up again and again with calls from my parents. I knew what they wanted, but I couldn't give it to them. I had already given them too much, my trust, my boundaries, my willingness to believe they'd never put us in real danger. I tried to focus on the kids, to keep our routine normal, to pretend the world hadn't shifted. But I was on edge, second-guessing every decision, wondering if we were truly safe. The next day, my parents arrived at our door. No warning, no call, just the doorbell, loud and insistent, like they were coming to drop off cookies, not to face the consequences of what they'd done. I opened the door enough to step outside and closed it behind me, refusing to let them inside my house. My new boundary marked in wood and silence. They stood there, acting as if nothing serious had happened. I could feel my anger rising, but I kept it pressed down, holding onto the only control I had left. They talked around the truth. They admitted nothing, offered only vague explanations and excuses. They wanted to clear the air, but the only air that needed clearing was poisoned by what they had done. When I confronted them with the facts, what they'd put in our car, with their grandchildren in the back seat, they shifted, uncomfortable, but not truly remorseful. There was no apology, only justification. They said it was to help with debt. They said they were desperate. They said I wouldn't help, and this was all they could do. Standing on my own porch, I realized that no matter what I said, no matter how clear I made the boundaries, they would always see my refusal to fix their problems as a personal betrayal. Their logic was simple. If I really loved them, I would have done whatever they asked, no matter the risk. My safety, my children's safety, didn't factor into the equation. They only saw the limits I set as another wound to nurse, another excuse to blame me when things went wrong. I told them it was over. I said not to call, not to come by, not to see the kids. It felt like stepping off a cliff, trusting that the ground would find me before I fell too far. My mother said I would come around, that I always did, but for the first time in my life, I didn't wonder if she was right. I walked back inside, closed the door, and let the silence settle. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe it was finished, that I had finally drawn a line deep enough to keep us safe. But family doesn't let go that easily. A few days later, I went to pick up my children from school, only to discover they weren't there. Panic surged, cold and absolute. I could barely form words as I tried to make sense of what I was being told. My parents had picked them up. The teacher thought it was normal, that I'd asked them to help. I raced to my parents' house, my mind churning with every terrible possibility. Inside, I found a party: balloons, toys, candy. My children dizzy with excitement, oblivious to the risk. My parents acted like nothing had happened. My mother cut cake. My father played with the kids, both of them pretending they were the kind of grandparents who deserved trust. I saw through it all. This wasn't love. This was manipulation, a last-ditch effort to prove they still had power. They showered the children with gifts, things they'd never done before, suddenly eager to be generous when it suited their needs. I told the kids we were leaving. They didn't understand. Of course they didn't. To them, it was just another day, more toys, more sugar, no reason to question anything. They clung to the new gifts, eyes wide with confusion as I herded them out the door. I let them keep the toys, not because I agreed with what was happening, but because I refused to give my parents one more excuse to paint me as the villain. That night, after the house was quiet, I sat down with my husband. I didn't want to talk about it. I just wanted it to be over. But I knew the only way to be truly safe was to leave. Not just the city, but the entire orbit of my parents' influence. I told him it was time. He agreed. No drama, no drawn-out arguments, just a quiet understanding that we couldn't let this happen again. We decided to move to North Carolina, where his family lived, where we could start over, where the past couldn't reach us. It wasn't a dramatic escape. There was no shouting, no last-minute chase, just the slow, steady process of untangling ourselves from a lifetime of expectations and disappointments. We blocked numbers, packed up our lives, and drove away, determined to give our children the peace we never had. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like we were in control, not just of the car, but of our own story. I spent the first nights in our new home waiting for the past to catch up. Every ring of the phone made my heart jump, but as the days passed and the quiet settled in, I realized I could finally breathe. The guilt was still there, but it no longer felt like a prison. I was free, or as close to free as I'd ever been. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I knew this: I would never let anyone use my loyalty against me again. Adjusting to our new life in North Carolina was not the fresh start I had pictured. I thought distance would wipe everything clean, but the past finds ways to follow you, especially when it comes with a lifetime of habits. Every morning, I woke up braced for the next message, the next call, the next attempt to pull us back. I kept my phone on silent. I deleted voicemails from unknown numbers without listening. I blocked every contact I could. My husband settled into work, the kids started school, and his parents, steady and genuine, became a quiet presence we could trust. Their help was simple, honest, given without expectation or price. That contrast only made the pain of what we'd left behind sharper. The kids adjusted faster than I did. They made new friends, found routines, learned to live without the constant push and pull of my family's chaos. Sometimes I envied them, their capacity to let go, their ability to accept what was in front of them without looking back. For me, the silence was uncomfortable. I had spent my whole life translating guilt into action, measuring love and how much I could fix. Now there was nothing to fix. There was just space and time and the slow process of learning how to be still. The urge to check my phone never fully disappeared. For weeks, I woke up expecting another crisis. I found myself making lists in my head, rehearsing explanations for choices I no longer had to justify. I watched my husband and children laugh together at the dinner table, and every now and then I'd catch myself waiting for some invisible shoe to drop. That's what families like mine teach you, to never trust the quiet, to brace for the storm even when the sky is clear. Then came the message from a cousin, a voice I barely remembered. The words were the same old song: concern, confusion, a reminder that family matters. My mother had reached out, told them she didn't know where I was, that she was worried. There was a plea beneath it all, a hope that someone else could convince me to come back, to reopen the wound, to put the family above my own peace. I didn't answer. I didn't explain. I deleted the message and moved on. Each time I refused to respond, it got a little easier, as if every boundary I kept made the next one more solid. Months passed. The world got quieter. My children flourished in ways I hadn't seen before. My husband slept better, smiled more, seemed lighter. I wanted to believe it would last, that I had finally outrun the shadow of my parents' choices. But peace, for me, never felt permanent. It was something to be earned, and even then, I didn't fully trust it. Then, just as I had started to believe we might really be free, my sister reached out. It was an email, marked urgent, the subject line a flare I couldn't ignore. I opened it expecting the usual, another problem, another plea for help disguised as an update. Instead, it was news. Our parents had been arrested. This time, it wasn't some misunderstanding or bad luck. They had tried to cross the border with drugs in their own car. No scapegoats, no diversions, just them and the consequences they had tried for years to push onto everyone else. My sister's message was frantic, scattered, thick with desperation. She wanted money, legal help, someone to rally around the cause of family. There was pressure in every line, a familiar expectation that I would be the one to save them, that I would step in and make things right, just like always. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling the old urge rise, the temptation to fix it, to make it go away, to be the good daughter who put everyone else first. But I didn't respond, not right away. I let the message sit in my inbox, a reminder of everything I had already survived. I thought about the years of giving in, the nights spent cleaning up messes I hadn't made, the days I'd spent apologizing for having boundaries at all. I had done my part. I had shown up when it mattered, even when it hurt. I had put my children, my husband, and myself in harm's way to protect a family that saw my loyalty as currency. I read my sister's words, felt the weight of her expectation, and knew I couldn't carry it anymore. When I finally replied, my answer was simple. I said I had already done enough. I wasn't coming back. I wasn't going to erase the line I had drawn. I owed my parents nothing but the truth that their choices had led them exactly where they were. I pressed send and closed the email, feeling something break free inside me, something I didn't even know was still tethered. I went outside and stood in the North Carolina air, breathing in the scent of pine and earth, feeling the space between then and now. My life wasn't perfect, but it was finally my own. For the first time, I didn't have to answer for anyone else's mistakes. I could be still, I could be safe, I could belong to myself. The news about my parents' arrest traveled through the family like a storm. Even after all the distance I had put between us, there was no escaping the ripple effects of what they'd done. Cousins started reaching out, some out of genuine confusion, some because they believed somehow I still owed everyone an explanation. I ignored the messages. I let the stories spread without my voice added in. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to justify myself or defend my choices or even clean up the mess left behind. The role I had carried for so many years, the family's fixer, no longer belonged to me. I put it down and refused to pick it back up. The facts of what happened were simple. My parents had crossed a line, literally and figuratively. They'd tried to take drugs across an international border. This time, there were no children in the car, no plausible deniability, no chance to shift the blame. They were caught, charged, and sentenced. The news was never big enough to make headlines, but it was more than enough to fracture whatever was left of our family's image. There was no hiding from it, no pretending this was just another misunderstanding or unlucky break. I spent a lot of time thinking about the way everything had played out, retracing the steps that brought us here. Even with the relief of distance, the old guilt still lingered. I found myself wondering if there was something I could have done differently, if some earlier boundary, some earlier refusal to enable, might have changed the outcome. But every time I let myself follow that line of thought, I came back to the same truth. There is only so much one person can do, and loving someone does not mean sacrificing yourself to their mistakes. In North Carolina, the days started to blur together in a way that felt almost peaceful. My children adapted to their new school, my husband built new routines, and I learned slowly to live with less anxiety. There was no longer a need to scan every message for hidden threats, no more waiting for the next crisis to land at my feet. I saw the changes in my children first. They laughed more. They argued less. They no longer looked for danger in every adult's face. I watched them become lighter, and I realized how heavy the old life had become. For years, I had believed that my job was to keep everyone else from falling apart. That if I was responsible enough, stable enough, giving enough, I could hold everything together. But the truth was, I had been carrying weight that never belonged to me. My parents' choices were always going to be their own, no matter how hard I tried to shield myself and my family. My refusal to rescue them now was not an act of cruelty. It was the first real act of love I'd shown myself in decades. There were quiet moments of doubt. Old habits die hard. Some nights I would lie awake, heart racing, replaying old conversations in my mind. I would hear my mother's voice, accusing, disappointed, certain that my boundaries were a sign of betrayal. I wondered if I was being too harsh, if there was some other way I could have kept us all safe and still stayed connected. But then I would remember the moment at the side of the road, the open trunk, the bag, and the realization of how close I had come to losing everything. That memory grounded me, reminded me that safety is not selfishness, that love with conditions is not love at all. As word spread about my parents' conviction, the attempts at guilt faded. The family stopped calling, the messages slowed, then stopped altogether. The absence felt strange at first, like stepping into a room where a loud machine has finally gone quiet. In that silence, I began to build something new, not just for myself, but for my children, and for the small family my husband and I had chosen to create. The freedom felt fragile at first, as if one wrong step could bring everything crashing down again. But every day that passed without drama, every laugh that came easy, made it a little more real. I learned to find comfort in small routines. Morning walks, quiet dinners, evenings spent reading or simply sitting together, no longer scanning the horizon for signs of danger. I watched my husband relax in ways I hadn't seen in years, his shoulders no longer tensed against the next demand. I let myself believe, little by little, that we could keep this peace, that we deserved it. The world outside went on as always, indifferent to our escape. The news cycle kept spinning, people came and went, and the memory of what had happened with my parents became just one more story in a long list of things that used to hold me captive. I didn't miss the chaos, I didn't miss the weight. I missed only the idea of what family could have been if things had been different. But I also knew that holding on to that idea was just another way to stay stuck. For once, I let myself grieve what was lost, and then I let it go. Life after the final break was quieter than I expected. There were no sudden moments of closure, no dramatic sense of release. Just days passing, routines forming, and the slow realization that what I'd feared for so long, the total absence of my parents and that web of old obligations, was not only survivable but a relief. I watched my family heal in small ways. My children grew more confident, less anxious. My husband stopped scanning the past for problems we could never solve. I learned to enjoy a kind of stillness I'd never known before. The guilt faded gradually, replaced by something closer to acceptance. I stopped expecting an apology that would never come. I stopped writing imaginary letters in my head, trying to explain my side to people determined not to hear it. The urge to check my phone faded. I blocked the last numbers, let the silence take root, and found that I could live in it. There was no more explaining, no more rescuing, no more searching for ways to prove my worth to people who decided long ago it would never be enough. I kept track of my parents' situation through distant relatives and the occasional piece of mail. They served their time, 4 years each, enough to make the consequences real, but not enough to erase the old patterns. I heard about plea deals and sentencing, about how they never admitted fault, about how the story they told others always placed the blame elsewhere. For a long time, I wondered what I would say if they ever tried to reach out again. But as the weeks and months passed, I realized it didn't matter. I had said everything that needed to be said with my absence. I started to measure my life by different markers, not in sacrifices made for someone else's comfort, but in the safety of my children, in the laughter that came easy, in the ordinary, unremarkable days where nothing bad happened and no one needed saving. I learned that boundaries are not walls, but acts of care, that saying no is sometimes the only way to say yes to the people who matter most. I found new ways to be generous, with my time, with my patience, with the love I had for the small family I had built, unburdened by the past. There were moments when the old sadness returned, a kind of mourning for what never was. I saw families around me who seemed easy with one another, who could disagree without cutting wounds that never healed. I grieved for the version of family I had tried so hard to create, for the hope that someday it would be my turn to be cared for, to be seen, to be loved without condition. But that grief became softer over time, losing its edge, becoming something I could carry without letting it control me. I began to understand that surviving is not just about making it through the worst moments, but about finding a way to live fully after. I learned to stop blaming myself for the choices of others, to stop believing that my love could fix what was broken long before I had a say. I watched my children grow into themselves, strong and unafraid, and I took pride in the peace I had fought for, the life I had chosen for us, even if it meant letting go of the people who brought me into this world. Looking back, I see the crossroads clearly. The moment in the car, the trunk open, the bag revealed, the realization that everything I'd worked to protect could vanish in an instant. I see the days that followed, each decision to step away, to draw a line, to keep moving forward instead of being pulled back. I know now that I didn't go too far. If anything, I waited too long to save myself and the people I love. There is no perfect ending to a story like this. The scars remain. The questions linger. Did I do enough? Was I right to cut them off? Will I ever be free of the fear that family can turn on you in a heartbeat? But the answers don't matter as much as they used to. What matters is the life I have now, built on choices I finally made for myself. If anyone else is listening, waiting for a sign that it's okay to put yourself first, to say enough is enough, to start over even when it feels impossible, I can say this. There is freedom on the other side of letting go. There is peace, and sometimes that's the only justice you get. I don't regret the boundary, not for a second.